Hello and welcome to the Winners Never Quit podcast about mental resilience, learning from hardship, all to build a winner's mindset. Hosted by myself, Jack Jarvis, and if you could like, follow or subscribe to the podcast, I would really appreciate it. Now today I am joined by explorer, survivalist and presenter Ness Knight. She has completed challenges and expeditions all over the world. Paddleboarding 1,000 miles down the Missouri River, cycling solo across America, and traversing the Namib Desert solo. She was also the first woman in history to swim the Thames River from source to London. She has just appeared on Discovery Channel's First Man Out with Ed Stafford, and she joins me now. Ness, how are you doing? You good?
I'm grand, mate. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much for coming down and being on the podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And we start every podcast the same. How do you define winning in your life?
Ooh, straight in for the big hitter, huh?
Well, I do try.
Oh, geez. You know, it's something that for me, I guess, has evolved over the decades. Each decade that comes with my life, I'm like, oh, that means something completely different to me. In my 20s, definitely when I started out being endurance athlete and adventurer, that was very much about trying to mark my place in the world, prove something to myself and the world. And so success for me then was being notable. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think in hindsight, looking back now, I think, God, that was arrogant. You know, that's really fickle of you to feel like that. And I was like, no, that's part of your journey as a youngster, kind of, you know, making your mark and stamping your ground. And things evolve over the last decade of me doing this. My career has evolved, and I as a person have too. And I guess now winning in life to me at this stage means having as few regrets as possible. I'm enormously curious about so many things. I'm obsessed with mental capabilities and pushing the boundaries back of what we think is humanly possible. I love wildlife. I love people. And so I think winning is not, you know, getting through this decade and saying, I've seen so much of the world that I feel enormously satisfied with myself with that. And I'm pretty much already at that place, you know, like touch wood. If I pop my clogs now, I'd actually be quite chuffed with where I'm at and what I've seen and what I've done. So, yeah, I guess for me, it's that being in that mental state where you feel very much at peace, very much content with where you've got. And for me, you know, for some people, you could say that that's a bad thing because being content could be just sitting on the sofa doing bugger all, right? But with my ambition in life, being content means pushing back those boundaries.
I totally know what you mean. When I finished my row last year, I had to go and do that ultra marathon. You know, there's always more out there, so I get
Where
it.
does it end? I know it's a dangerous
but that's the
game,
thing.
isn't
Like,
it?
when does it stop?
I don't know. You tell me, mate.
So we're going to get to all these challenges and the first man out, but let's go back. Tell me about your childhood, and have you always been adventurous, or is this something that you came on in your early 20s? Where does that sense of adventure stem from?
Yeah, you know, I'm kind of an accidental adventurer in a way. My career before doing this was in London, working for a social enterprise, doing e-commerce and programming. It's a complete world away, you know, teaching entrepreneurship. And so I kind of had to, you know, take a little break from that and ended up going and, you know, just having a bit of a hiatus from, you know, city life and going out and saying, well, I'm just going to stand a paddleboard 1,000 miles. But going back even further to my childhood, I guess you wouldn't have seen this coming. I look at my childhood friends that I had, and they're absolutely baffled as to where I'm at in life now. They never thought that they'd see me doing anything of the sort because I was incredibly shy, very introvert. I had a wild and vivid imagination as a kid, and I was very tomboyish. I grew up with 2 older brothers, and, you know, in South Africa, that's where I was born. That's where I grew up for the first 15 years of my life. You know, it was very outdoorsy, and I lived in my own head, and I went through school and I actually really struggled. You know, I really battled because I had this huge, enormous amount of energy and creativity and, you know, curiosity about the world, and very tomboyish and wanting to go get and do stuff. But I didn't know how to communicate that to myself or the world because I was very introvert. And so, yeah, it's been quite a journey, I guess. I think growing up in South Africa probably planted the seed for a lot of outdoor stuff because, you know, you go on holiday and it's safari and you're out there in the bush and, you know, very outdoorsy lifestyle in South Africa. But yeah, it's been a hell of a journey, and it's been evolving over the years. And I can't say that there's a catalyst or anything like that for me suddenly doing what I'm doing. I think it was hugely accidental and just a long journey of saying, I'm really uncomfortable as a 15-year-old girl in this position where my friends are pretty shitty to me. So I hope I can swear on this podcast.
You can, yeah. Don't worry.
Got a bit of a potty mouth. And
we're going to get on just fine, because so have
brilliant.
I.
I had a rough time because I was, I couldn't express myself very well. And so I got to such a low point with that as a youngster that I promised myself that I would find the thing that I was most passionate about in life and do that, and not follow what everyone dictates I should do. Everyone always wanted me to play with dolls and do very girly stuff, and I was like, that's just not me. But I also promised myself that I would face all my deepest fears, and maybe going through that hell as a kid, as an introvert kid, was maybe my catalyst, I suppose, because from the age of about 18, I just sought out all the things that most terrified me in life and just went for them. And I absolutely shat myself, but I did it. And so quickly, going through that and putting yourself in the deep end, you just transform so fast.
Totally, that whole baptism by fire.
Yeah.
You've got to. So it's interesting you should say that, because I always think, I didn't have a background in rowing, but I always remember this when I was younger. I was saying to my mum, I'm going to climb Mount Everest one day. And she'd be like, Jack, you're 5. Like, let's chill out here a little bit.
Little
so
did
it's
she know.
Yeah, little did she know it could be on the cards next year. It's handy, though. I'm actually, Nims.
Yeah.
So I served with his brother-in-law. So
wow.
Yeah. So how lucky is that to have a friend? Yeah.
And Nims is an absolute legend. I mean, like, talking about pushing back the boundaries of what's humanly possible. Jeepers.
Yeah. TJ, if you're listening to this, mate, I want a discount for Everest next year.
Mate, I was also thinking of going to Everest. So can I get in on that? Just putting that out there.
So Ness, you said you wanted to do things that scared you. Paddleboarding 1,000 miles. Talk me through that expedition. Was that the first one?
That was the first expedition. It wasn't the first thing that scared me, though.
Okay, no, I'm sure not.
By that stage, I'd grown quite a fair amount of confidence. But yeah,
So how old were you
then? Probably early 20s.
Okay.
Can't remember exactly. Early mid 20s, around there. Getting old now, geez. And yeah, I spent so many years working in that corporate world and teaching other people how to find a way to make money out of doing what they love, being an entrepreneur. And I was sitting there lining someone else's pockets myself, and I was like, God, I'm really like not doing what I'm preaching to others to do and teaching them how to do it. So I just quit. I just walked in one day. I was like, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm leaving. This is great, but I'm leaving. And headed out to stand up paddleboard. And yeah, it was 1,000 miles. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it was an incredible journey. It was a team one. So yeah, we went down that river. There's a huge amount of dynamics going on that expedition. That's a whole another story. Won't go there. But yeah, it was an incredible journey. We had some crazy, wild and wonderful experience. I remember at one point we were coming down the river and we had the sandbank on the side, and we decided to just camp there. It was really beautiful. We went up to the top of it. We were on the inside of the river at that point, in that corner. And we camped at the top, and then at about, 10 o'clock, and close to midnight at night, we heard a lot of voices and shouting across the way, and all of a sudden we heard gunshots. We're like, oh shit, we're like right next to a firing range, and there's a bunch of hillbillies out there going absolutely balls to the wall on the Saturday night, drunk as heck. Like, okay, this should be fine, we'll just be quiet. And a few minutes later, this massive beam just like kind of swung across the waterway and just stopped on our bright yellow paddleboards and tents, and they were just like, ooh, and it just went dark, and then it came on again, and we're like, oh, you know what's happening now? And it was exactly what we thought. Was we were just kind of bait for them to play around and muck around with, and they started firing at us, but you could tell that they were trying to fire close enough to scare us, but not necessarily get us. But they were drunk as hell. Yeah. And so, we were in the tents, and you just hear these bullets. Literally, like one of the ones early on just came right underneath the front of my tent door, into the sand. And you just hear the and like straight over your head. And so we army crawled our way out of it, went like around the back there, just waited a couple of hours. So we were like, we can't call up the authorities because they're not really going to do anything out there. They'll have a chat to the guys, be like, listen, what the hell is going on? And then they'll get pissed off and they'll come back with their mates and be like, no, fuck you. What have you done trying to get the authorities on us and do it again? So yeah, we just kind of left it, waited for it to die down. But no, that was a cool expedition. It was really cool. But by the end of it, I figured out that I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life yet. And I didn't want to go back home. And I had a few $100s in my accounts, US dollars, because I was in the USA at the time. And so, yeah, I borrowed men's shoes 2 sizes too big, got a bicycle that was older than I was, got panniers from the 1960s that were crumbling and falling apart and just hashed together, borrowed, still, didn't really steal. But I got all this equipment from people that were just really supportive. And I was like, I just want to go west across the USA. I don't know where I'm going. I'm going to follow my nose and just go and just do this thing solo and figure out what my next step in life is going to be. And yeah, I did that. And as I was doing it, social media was in its infancy at the time. And so I was doing that whole blogging thing, getting stuff out there and telling the stories. And all of a sudden, this huge wave of curiosity of people following that were like, oh, this is cool. And they were living vicariously through me. And there was this huge demand at the time for women going out there doing stuff, because there's always been women. And women have always done expeditions, done crazy things around the world. You just didn't hear about it, So suddenly there was this demand and this hunger for that. And me being entrepreneurial and teaching entrepreneurship for many years, I was like, hang on a second, I'm loving this, being out here doing my thing, and I can make money out of this curiosity that people have in this. And so I just monetized that, and I was like, right, I'm just going to start a career, see what happens with this and see where it goes.
And I want to talk about, you said team dynamics, so the paddleboard was a team thing and then you went solo. What are the differences? Because I often get asked, why did I do the row solo? And I say it's because team dynamics can make or break an expedition. So what was the big differences between the solo and then your team expedition? Oh,
it's the hardest thing in life to get right, isn't it? Whether it's in a corporate environment or out there doing these kind of crazy expeditions, is team dynamic. Wow. For most of my career, I actually did stuff solo because that first experience scarred me so badly that I was like, I'm staying
that
well
doesn't
clear
surprise
of
me.
this.
I've spoken to a lot of friends who have done stuff with teams, and they have said to me, they were like, mate, it makes it harder. You think it'd make it easier, more people, more hands on deck, but it just does not transfer that way.
No, and you know
if
what?
You get it wrong, that is. If you have a great team, it can be fantastic.
And you know what the thing I realised about team dynamics, like we'll dive into the solo versus that again in a second, but the thing that I've understood the most, having gone through a few teams since then, and speaking to a lot of people in the corporate world about their team dynamics and experiences, so what people often do is they make a mistake of trying to go into each of the departments or each of the skill sets and expertise, as it were, and pick on paper the best person in that field and say, okay, they're the leader, they're the best of the best in their field, so we're going to pull them and we're going to pull them, and they get all these top-notch guys and girls and bring them together, and no one's taken any consideration or understanding of the personalities, the dynamics that those characters will have when they come together. And so you get a lot of egos coming into play, you get a lot of people that have different goals and outcomes that they want to get out of it, and that doesn't always gel, and so it looks like it should be the best thing on Earth. This is amazing project with these amazing characters that have this track record that's through the roof, and they just implode.
A good example is that's why I interviewed GB sprinter OJ Edeburan, and he says the US sprinting team, they just pick the 4 quickest guys at 100 meters, and then they're like, work it out. Whereas the British team, they'll pick, you might not be the quickest guy, but you might be good at the third leg, the cross, when you go around the curve.
Yeah.
So a lot more thought goes into it, whereas the US team are just like, we'll pick the 4 fastest guys and see if they can make it happen.
And that's hit or miss. Sometimes it can work great, if it's a short, sharp, go for it kind of thing, but over months and years, stuff could really deteriorate. There's a lot of itching and scratching.
Well, they haven't won it every year on the bounce, so,
Exactly.
Well, every 4 years on the bounce.
Yeah, it's not consistent. And so, that consistency that people look for in, long-term gains and winning, I think that comes from really understanding a dynamic of characters and, the outcomes and what everyone wants to get out of something and what the strengths that they can bring to the table. So it's a complicated game. It's not something that you can just say like, oh, that looks like it should work. No, you got to, dig a little bit deeper into how it should work. For a long time, I just wanted to do solo. I mean, part of that was because of being scarred by that experience. Part of it was also my obsession with neuroscience and mental capabilities, pushing boundaries. And that's been since I was a tiny kid. And so, yeah, for me, going solo is just such an incredibly curious experience. You know, like how far can I push myself? Because for me, it's that fascination with if you're out there on your own in the middle of the ocean, you know, like you were, or out in the middle of the African bush with the big five, or in the jungles trying to survive out there. If you're on your own, there's no one to rely on except yourself. So when it comes to decision making, you have to learn to trust yourself. And that's harder than it sounds, because people constantly doubting, second guessing themselves. And you think that you're all confident and cocky, but you're out there in a survival situation. And so that's, for me, where the biggest growth has happened in my life, is actually trying to go solo and say, you got to make it or break it, because no one's there to back you up. No one's there to kind of support you, to be a sounding board, to say, oh, I don't think that's a bad decision, that's a great one. What you decide is potentially life or death. And I love that. I love that. And I've always come back off those expeditions walking 6 inches taller every time.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the row, to have that experience where my decisions were ultimately life and death, where everything's to play for.
What were your biggest struggles with that?
Probably the food. I've got to be honest.
It's always food, I know.
It's so bizarre though, Ness. Like, I will always get asked, oh, what's the hardest bit? But once, that's what I mean, the body is amazing. Once you've pushed through that first 5 days, your body adapts. Like, I remember the first 5 hours, like, oh my God, I've got another 90. It took 111 days. I was like, my back is so sore. My hands are covered in blisters. My arse is chafing. And I was just like, how am I going to do this? But after that 5 days, you just get used to the backache. Your hands toughen up.
Desensitized, don't you? It's a weird thing. It does happen.
You just get used to being alone, and it's absolutely mental.
Yeah.
You know, so once you've done those first 5 days, you just adapt. And I was never going to quit. And, you know, it goes down to it probably comes into a little bit of survival. You like, right, well, what are we going to do? We're going to keep rowing, or are we just going to stop in the Canaries?
You should step off the boat and then
yeah, exactly. So
what choice do you have?
So what I want to know is, when did you make the change from sort of the endurance athlete stuff to survivalist? Because I'm presuming, I am presuming that you weren't in survival mode when you were swimming the Thames. You know, obviously there was a support crew and all that.
I felt like it at times. I mean, like, I hope no one's eating when I'm, you know, telling the story. But I mean, Thames River, I wish I'd chosen somewhere that had clear, beautiful waters, nice warm waters, you know, because that was muddy. You couldn't see anything. You can't hear anything because you got your earplugs in the whole day. You know, you can't speak to anyone because you got your head in the water for 10 hours a day. But yeah, like going through that, we went through. I had someone supporting me on a paddleboard, so they can just like feed me food and, you know, set up a tent at the end of the day. And I went through an area, I think it was near Marlow, where they had sewage leaks, and shortly after that, I got profoundly unwell.
It happened to David Williams as well, didn't it?
Yeah, you know, I swam with my head above water, but of course, you know, it gets everywhere, this stuff. And I know you can see bits and places floating. It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But yeah, I got to the point where I was just trying to push through it so badly that I ended up not being able to get to the edge to go to the toilet, and you just shit yourself in your swimsuit, and then you have to take it off in the water, wash it off, put it back on in the water, and be like, all good, guys, nothing to see here. So not quite the wild and crazy, scary, life-threatening, but just not fun.
Yeah,
not fun.
How long did it take you, by the way?
God, I think it was it 3 weeks eventually because of the illness.
Yeah.
Nice to take a few days off. It's only so long you can put yourself in a wetsuit before you're like, okay, time out.
I bet.
But I think it was something like that.
So what made you make the switch then to a more survivalist sort of expeditions?
You know, for me, it's just about you go out into the world and you do enough traveling and you do enough experiencing of nature and people, and it changes you. You come back profoundly changed, and it becomes a totally new journey. My career's evolved time and again. You know, before it was about mentally and physically pushing the boundaries for myself and, doing that endurance athlete thing. And I realized how capable I was. I'd succeeded in so many things of what I was unsure of whether or not I could succeed at. And so I'd press those buttons for myself, and it was fine. And then I realized that, you know, there's stories that are bigger than myself out there in the world. So I got really curious about, indigenous communities and tribes out there in the world, and that ancient primitive survival, because I was like, hang on a second, you know, the people stories are fascinating, and there's so much more to tell about them than there is about me. You know, I got a little bit bored after a while trying to, tell people stories about my own mental and physical journey and these amazing things. So I was like, what can I learn? Because I was in this growth mode in my life now because of what I'd achieved. And I realized that, that for me at the time, I guess success was really, and winning was coming down to whether or not I was growing as a human being. And I'd kind of hit a ceiling of what I wanted to achieve in that realm. And so I went to Sand Bushman, I went into the jungle, I started being around these communities that had a challenge that I don't think even in a lifetime I could nail down and master, and that is that primitive survival. These guys have it through generations of, teaching and understanding and living and being in that environment day in and day out. And so that was the next level. Can you go out there with clothes on your back and a knife in your hand on your own in the middle of nowhere with no extraction and survive and come out of it? Can you do that? For how long can you do that? And that for me was utterly fascinating. And just I was like a moth to the flame with that, and still am.
What was one of the most amazing things you saw or learned from one of these indigenous groups? If you had to try and pick one, you can pick a couple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We could be here for quite a few hours, mate. What struck me the most is I just feel like having gone from city life out here to the middle of the jungle, the Essequibo River, Guyana, South America. That's what one of the expeditions was. It really struck me, and this was the same with the Sand Bushmen in Namibia, spending a lot of time with them, was I came from this crazy busy, city life where everything's shouting at you, your phone's buzzing in your face, people are noisy, there's stuff beeping about trains and where to go, what to do, adverts shouting at you, and it's all just this noise, this buzz, and everyone's shouting and screaming to grab and get your attention. And you become a bit lazy, don't you? Because whatever shouts the loudest is what gets your attention, and that's the world that we live in at the moment. And I went out there and I realized, they were going down the river with them, and they'd be like, what can you see over there? They were kind of testing me, and they were training us up a little bit. We came in as jungle toddlers. We thought we knew our stuff. We didn't. There were jungle toddlers out there, and they were like, we're going to school you and teach you, and you're going to be our students, and, you're going to eventually graduate. And during that time, they would ask us these questions and test us and train us on stuff. And they said, what can you see over there? I said, no idea, mate. I was in the middle of the river. Look, they're pointing to the bank on the side, probably about 30 meters away. I had no idea. What can you see? Nothing. I don't know. What can you hear? Well, there's birds in the trees, and as we come closer, like getting to about 3 meters, what can you see? I was like, I have no idea. I'm searching, mate. I'm searching. I'm looking. He's like half a meter away. He's like, can you see it now? I'm like, oh, the snake on the vine over there. Okay, mate. But what really struck me is, that's just one thing that I struggled with, just seeing the right things. They grew up in this environment, but their senses all round, the ability to smell, to hear, to see, to feel that entire environment in 360 at every single point in time, and also have a sixth kind of instinctual sense because they've grown up with a lifelong understanding of the behavior of animal, the behavior of the seasons. The whole environment just makes sense, and it's this puzzle that comes together for them. And we've lost that ability. It's innate in us, but we've kind of lost it because we're stuck in this completely different Western world out here. And their abilities there just made me feel like it's just completely humbled. Like, heck, how did we lose this? This is phenomenal what they have. We think we're so advanced out here. We've got nothing on them. Absolutely nothing.
You'll probably know the name of the tribe, but there's a tribe in Africa, and they will chase like an antelope or something until it dies.
Yeah.
They will outrun it.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredible. I remember watching that on some program, and I was just amazed. I was like, they literally run that animal to death.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Endurance is phenomenal.
I was in another one as well. Where was I? Brunei. And the IBAN, and they did a booby trap day for us. So while we were at work, and you'd be walking down the safe lane, and again, it goes back to what you were saying. Could you see that? And you're like, no. And then all of a sudden they'd pull something. This huge stake would come swinging in, and you're like, oh my God, I'd be so dead.
Yeah, completely.
I'd be absolutely dead within a minute.
Yeah, that's why they called us jungle toddlers, because we would not have survived a couple of days out there in that. Jeez.
So you've done some amazing challenges, but what's been one of your toughest moments, whether it be the endurance athlete stuff or the survivalist stuff? What's been a real tough moment that you can pinpoint?
Across the board, it's always going to come down to the mental game, isn't it? That mental fortitude and that iron mind out there, and your awareness. But I suppose most of all, complacency, because that's the fastest killer, isn't it? It really is. And so my scariest moments would be all of the times that complacency kicked in or panic kicked in. And there'd be things like crossing the Namib Desert solo on a fat bike. And I remember coming through a gorge canyon area, and I was going through lion territory, a conservation region that was deep in lion territory. And so I wasn't allowed to go through that section unless I had a lion warden, they call them, going ahead of me, 5-10 kilometers, just kind of scouting and on a radio with me saying, hey, just be aware of this stuff happening. And so I was coming through this gorge area, and I got him on the radio saying, hey, listen, you're going to come out of this gorge, you're going to go up, down, round left, there's going to be a river bend, follow that over there, and you're going to see a fresh lion kill 200 yards on the right. So there's vultures, there's, hyena, jackals, all the rest of it. Just be aware of that. They're about here somewhere, they're satiated, but just be aware of it. And so I just went into full-blown panic mode because I've never been in that.
He's 5k away as well.
Yeah,
he's not close.
Well, he didn't tell me exactly how far. He was just like, just go follow the riverbed. And I'm like, how far? When?
I bet he was so blasé about it as well,
and
wasn't
he's
he?
like, yeah, and just before that, he'd be like, just be careful in the canyons because you're boxed in, mate. And by the way, on a fat bike, you look like a really tasty antelope. So good luck. I'm like, shit, thanks. What do I do when I come across predator lions again? And yeah, I just started panicking, and we were heading at some points out there temperatures of 49 degrees Celsius, and it was a drought period in the country, which I hadn't banked on, so a lot of the water sources that I was going to rely on were dry, so I was hugely dehydrated, pushing my limits, and insane temperatures out there. I'm trying to go as fast as I could because we're on we're filming the thing and we're on a bit of a time limit, and they're like, come on, Ness, let's make this hard, come on. So I was really at the very limits of what I could do, and panic in that period of time just sent me, I tried to push as hard as I could, and I lost consciousness right next to that fresh lion kill. And luckily he'd come back with his gut instinct, thinking like, okay, let's just go check this out with his landy, and he found me just wandering around, absolutely super out of it, like non comprende, mumbling, completely insane. And so it's those, fear is great. That is so important in life, to have fear across the board, because that tells you something important, good, about what you need to be aware of, your environment around you. It tells you a story, and it's important. That's part of our survival evolution as human beings. But what is really dangerous is panic. That's a completely different ballgame. That is a loss of control of yourself. And so that's where, you're unable to hold your composure. And it's always those times during any expedition where I've lost that composure and I've delved into panic instead of just that fear state where you can control things around you. So yeah, there's been a few hairy moments like that. And again, also complacency. There's so many times in the jungle where nothing would, we were in a place in South Guyana where there was no extraction. The guys said to us, listen, if you have something go wrong out there, we don't have any helis in the country or neighboring countries with a winch that we can have available for you. So extraction is a non-go. Yeah. Unless you can cut down an area of rainforest almost the size of a football pitch, then we can't get you out. So if something goes wrong, you just need to, be aware of that. And that's a risk that you have to take. And so we're like, okay, well, I'm sure
interesting.
It'll be fine.
Sorry to interrupt, but because I want people to know you're not cutting that down with chainsaws. No. So we had a casualty in Brunei, so we had to clear an opening, not as big as a football field, luckily, because it was a lynx. But as we were cutting down, another guy went down with a heat injury. So he then collapsed. So we then had two casualties to cut this. So, we really,
it's no small task.
No, it's not a small task.
When you're in somewhere that's primary virgin rainforest, the size of those beasts, those trees out there is insane.
Do you know,
it's just not happening,
I looked at him when he went down with heat, and I know it sounded really bad because obviously he just collapsed. He was fine. I remember thinking, you jack bastard.
Yeah, why now? Come on, mate. Jeez. Pick your timing.
Yeah. Sorry, anyway, you were saying.
Yeah, no, so it's, you go out there in these environments and you get out there and at first you're super hyper aware of everything and nothing happens for a few days and everything's going super well and you're super chuffed and everyone's grand and you do start getting pretty exhausted and tired and you're pushing it out there and everyone's not eating really well and so you're a bit exhausted And you get complacency set in because nothing's happened and you're pretty tired and you're like, oh, well, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's fine. And then all of a sudden somebody in the team, tries to jump over a log and, pit viper is 1 inch away from their ass that, is in strike mode. And you're like, if they actually got struck, if something did happen, that's it. It's tickets, and that's just because we weren't being aware. There were 3 people that went in front of her and could have seen that. And everyone was just so blasé and so just not caring to look out for anything. It's like, oh, shit, man, Like, that's the stuff that goes wrong.
I had exactly the same. So in that first 3 days, because obviously there's ants that are huge, like the floor just moves.
It's insane, isn't
and
it?
You'd be like that, really careful when you go to like lay down or anything like that.
Yeah.
But then after like day 3, you're so exhausted, you just throw yourself on the floor, probably straight in an ant's nest. You just, I don't care, I'm too tired. When you were in the jungle, you've eaten some questionable looking bugs. I want to know, what was one of the worst tasting ones you've eaten? That's just what I've seen off your Instagram.
Yeah. Well, that's updated now. So yeah, out in Africa it was these little grubs, but they apparently there's a difference between the wood grubs and the ones that you get in like compost piles and in dirt and things like that. They go for the wood ones because they taste really good. The ones that eat dirt and literally half their body is filled with crap, like brown, horrible. It's the smell. I can't even describe it to you. It's just a stench that makes your eyes water and your nose just absolutely burns. It's just horrendous. So yeah, retching those things up. Oh, nasty, nasty. Yeah, they came, I think it was about 10 minutes late and they all came straight back up. They did not stay down. That fatty, beautiful nutrition that I was talking about did not stay down. But yeah, recently in Taiwan, there's a higher altitude jungle, mountainous jungle that we were in for First Man Out with Ed Stafford. And that is basically you have an infill and an exfil and you have seven or so days between and 70 to 100 kilometers and you race each other with the clothes on your back and a knife in your hand and that's it. So you just survival mode out there. And I think it was about 3 days in I was bloody starving and we were very limited on what we could do out there because in Taiwan you can't hunt, so we couldn't get any substantial meat source in us unless it was fish. And yeah, I was just sat there trying to strip some bark off a tree so I had some stuff to lash, shelter later on. And I looked down and there was just this puddle, and it started shimmering and I looked closer and it just started, like moving with little bulbous things inside it. And I was like, tadpoles, but not your tiny tadpoles. The ones that are like your fingernail size and they got little back legs and they black and they got a long tail and they massive. So
nearly
gelatinous.
Frogs, yeah.
Yeah, like pretty much there, but just still that gelatinous state. And I was like, oh, those look like cool inky black things that might give nutrition. Shoveled a bunch of those back down my throat and it's like they literally they get halfway down your throat and they're like, no, fuck this. Mate, we're not dying here in this black hole of doom. And they turn around and they start trying to make their way back up, but they're bitter as hell, so you don't want to chew them, but you just feel them wiggling their way down. It's nasty stuff. Yeah.
So this wasn't in a survival, this was actually for the senior lads' entertainment, but we used to do initiations in the military. I don't know if I can say that because they're like highly illegal now, but they did happen and they weren't that bad. But and there's, sorry, let me do a little pre-thing to that story. So on the All Arms Command, of course, you needed emergency rations. Now, I used to have 2 boost bars because they were the highest calorie chocolate, quite nice. What you'd want if you saw a helo and you were like, right, I need a quick burst of energy to run over to it. But some lads were like, no, you need to have like cat food in sachets. Right? No, listen, because then they were like, because you'll only eat that if you're in a survival situation. Okay? And I was like, you're an idiot. But anyway, fast forward to my initiation. The worst thing I ate that evening, so we had like mealworms from Pets at Home, crickets, which weren't too bad, they were quite crunchy.
Yeah, they're not too bad.
Pig snouts that they had to barbecue, so that was just quite fatty, quite nice. The worst thing, Ness, was the cat food. It
Poor
was
bloody
honestly,
cats. What are we doing to
them? Yeah, I know. I don't understand how they like it.
No, but I think, like, to be fair, still on the topic of food, I think more the difficult things were the mental ones. Like when we were out in the jungle, we stopped on the side for lunch on this rock, and 2 of the guys just like legged it into the jungle with the sound of some stuff that was happening in there. It's just a wall of green that they just melted into. And after a couple of minutes, there was this shouting and screaming. A couple more of them headed back, into there. We had these 5 of the best warriors from the village down in the south of Guyana there that came with us. And like, one guy was left, the old guy, you know, by the boats, and we're like, what the hell is going on? And he just had this twinkle in his eye, and we're like, it sounds like literally two flipping villages are attacking each other. Do we need to go and help? What the hell is going on in there? Huge shouting and screaming, and then it goes silent, and they come nipping back out of this, you know, wall of green, and just this hand pokes out with this armadillo. I'm like, right, okay, so you were hunting, but what the hell is this screaming? And this guy puts his face through, you know, the wall of green. He's a huge grin on his face, and he's just like, yeah, we got that from a jaguar. They literally stole the lunch from a jaguar that was hunting that armadillo. And I think for a couple of the girls, you know, that was a bit of a shock, because you know, you're out there eating stuff that's really weird and wonderful. You know, I think the hardest thing for us though was, and it was so understandable for these guys, is they're in the middle of nowhere, no roads in or out of their village. And so when they came with us to find the source of the village, of the river, the Essequibo River, and then they come back downriver to their village, they used that as a hunting expedition on the way back, obviously, because that's their food source, you know, it's their backyard. And so they would do things like, when we were setting up our base camp and we had to trek because the water was too low, we couldn't go any further upriver. We'd make these trails, and you know, that we could follow back on route downriver again. And they would take tortoises and put them on their backs so that they couldn't move. And they'd kind of tie things up to stuff, you know. And so at the beginning, a lot of our team would really upset about that, and kind of like, what the hell is going on? You know, this is cruelty.
But it's a different way of life.
This is, yeah, exactly. You know, like, do you even know where your meat comes from?
Yeah.
It comes in this like paper polystyrene thing. Like, you know nothing about where your stuff comes from and or like what it's gone through. So don't start talking.
I know.
And I think maybe one of the
factory farming's so much nicer.
Oh, totally, right. And I think one of the most interesting and probably challenging things was on the way back down the river, they were hunting dwarf caiman. And for me, it was fascinating. Like, I didn't have such a block to all of this happening, you know, because it's their cultures the way they are. It's survival, literally. And they have such a small footprint on their environment, and they're so respectful of it. You know, it's a symbiotic relationship they have with it. So I've got utter respect for the way they do things. But, you know, they would hunt these caiman and then tie their legs and put them under our seats in the dugout canoes. And they'd be sat there for a couple of days thrashing around until we got to a place where we had enough of a base. You know, they'd take a few of them all the way home, but some of them they would smoke along the way, and we'd eat some of the stuff. So, you know, you're sitting there paddling down river, and you've got this caiman underneath, like literally between your legs, thrashing around. And it was just such a weird experience, but such a humbling one. I just came back off that thinking, bloody hell, at least they know where their stuff comes from. So it's harsh, and it's a harsh thing out there, but
it's the way of life.
Yeah.
So when we were in Norway, and you do a survival ex out there, and the locals bring a reindeer, and they were like, no one's to film it, but I know what you mean. They have that symbiotic relationship. They use the whole thing of that reindeer, and the way they dispatched it must have known it was for the chopping block because it was kicking off. They brought it out. Put the knife through the back of its head, and it was dead instantly. But they used the whole thing, no waste. And I just thought,
exactly.
And a few of the lads were like, "No, I can't have any of that." And I was like, "Fine, go hungry."
Yeah,
more
completely.
for me.
Yeah,
it was delicious.
Yeah, you start getting into like eating brain and stuff like that, and you know the hearts and all the organs. And you're like, shit, we do none of this at home, and it's so nutritious.
We waste so much of it.
I know.
You know, it's like
massively.
Talk about where your food comes from. Well, that's why hamburgers. Who am I? American. Beef burgers, sausages, and chicken nuggets. They're not cuts of meat, are they?
No, people knew or went into those.
Come on, get real.
Your hot dog. Just go and research that, mate.
Being a role model, how important do you think that is, and how important is it to you to be a role model for girls and women to pursue what they love or to push their boundaries, to face their fears?
Yeah, definitely. It's become a massive thing. You know, I never started out in my career thinking of that at all, because I always just thought I was just a nobody, you know, just going out there, just doing my own thing. But you realize that, you do have an audience, and you do have, you know, like it or not, you're making a career out of eyeballs on you. So you have, therefore, a responsibility of how you go about your career and your life, and things that you say, the things that you do. And yeah, I do wholeheartedly take on that role model side of things, because I grew up as a young girl in sports and in exploration and anything. I was, you know, the spotlight was on men, and so I just didn't know that there were all of these things that I could do. There were options as careers, you know. I just didn't see women, and it's not that they weren't doing it, I just didn't know. So for me, it's a great opportunity to highlight that. You know, I'm not one of these extremist people that think it's got to be all women, or, you know, you don't fix an all men thing by doing all woman stuff. So I'm kind of like, teams should be completely mixed, and whoever's got the best capability kind of stuff.
Or should be picked for a job or succeed. Yeah.
I don't, you know, I'm not going to play someone just because they're a woman.
Yeah.
Whoever's best for the job, that's at the end of the day all I give a shit about. But at the same time, it's really, it's really humbling and really great to be able to have, you know, especially I've got a daughter now, 16-month-old girl, to be able to have girls kind of look at my stuff. And I think the important thing for me is for women and girls and young guys as well to look at my channel and say, I'm not there with, you know, arse and tits out on top of a mountain trying to get gains of followers and, you know, make money off of that.
I've seen a few of them on my Instagram Discover page.
Totally, right? Like, you'll find very few where you can see, you know, me in a bikini or anything like that. And it's that's not me deliberately trying to be the opposite way. It's just who I am. I'm a tomboy. That's just but, you know, I'm not relying on sexualizing anything. And I see so much of social media is about not just sexualizing, but just how, you know, it's so much about the visual, about how you look. And for me, it's like, no, mate, just go out there, do shit, do stuff that's cool. Just get your mates and go do some cool shit up a mountain, or, you know, just get out there and have fun and just be raw and rugged and real. And so for me, that's the biggest thing is, you know, I'm really reveling in having a channel and a following where I can just go on expeditions and be, in my eyes, this kick-ass cool female doing really crazy cool things, and people appreciate it just for that. Yeah,
appreciate that you are kicking ass, and you really aren't worried about that. Really aren't worried about the visuals, because that first one on your Instagram, you're eating that grub. There is blood and guts, and you're just absolute no emotion. I'm saying, it's impressive. I was like, oh my god, who am I going to interview? Who is this absolute?
I know, like, I've had to, I won't lie, I am human, and I have had to come to terms with that. A lot of the footage and the images of me are looking absolutely flipping horrendous.
No, like, you look like a badass. With blood dripping down your mouth.
It might look badass, but I just don't care anymore. You go on these expeditions, and for 3 months you don't have a mirror, you don't know what you look like. And you come off the end of it, and you don't, you know, I cared more about the fact that my arms looked like a rugby player, and that it was the strength of them, you know, that I had, and the physical capabilities, and you just don't care what you look like when you can't see yourself. And that's so refreshing. And so for me, I've come, you know, through such a brilliant journey where now I love dressing up. It's great, and I have fun with that. You know, put makeup on for the first time in a couple of months with us today, but I don't care too much about that.
No,
really don't.
I get it. So
it's fun.
Tell us about this latest expedition with Ed Stafford.
Yeah,
I know you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but tell me the details.
Well, I can't give too much away because I know it's one of those annoying things. No, it was absolutely raucous, riotous fun, and horrendous at the same time. It was a beating. I got battered, bruised. Literally, I came out at the end of it. I remember the final day was such a hard push. I got to the end of it and looked down, and I was like, why are my legs hurting so much? And especially my right leg. I looked down, I was like, it was so swollen that it was overflowing my boots, my jungle boots that I had. And I don't know what was wrong with that. I don't know if it was water retention and strain and stress. If in the river, I'd got washed away so many times downriver, and trying to cross it, I was just so battered, literally slammed against rocks. But it was brilliant fun. So Ed and I just head to head against each other 7 days, infil to exfil, survive with just a knife in your hand. And, you know, for me, I chose a route that, you know, we were up against, I was up against with my film crew trailing me, you know, flood waters going down there. And it was quite hair raising and a lot of fun. And yeah, I guess it was another challenge, trying to survive without being able to hunt. That was quite hard.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But yeah, he's a bastard for he chose mountainous jungle to go through, and I'm like, really, mate? Like, you could have chosen something a lot easier. But yeah, no, it was good fun.
I mean, if you'd pick something easier though, no one would watch.
No, true.
Because people love suffering, don't they?
They do.
They're sick. But imagine if you were watching something and someone had to survive in a Tesco's. You wouldn't watch it, would you? There'd be no jeopardy, no despair.
It's like, what's wrong with us as humans? Like, I know, that's literally why people follow. Is they're like, what horrendous thing might you do? Like, they don't care about the pretty scenery or the great, beautiful stuff that you do. They don't care. Yeah. It's like, when are you going to eat grubs again next, Ness? Like, come on.
So, we've talked about the challenges you have done, but what about the ones that you haven't done? What have you got your eye on? Is there anything in the pipeline that you've sort of looking at, or a challenge that really excites you?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. As usually, the stuff that you just can't talk about because you can't give it away. But one thing that is ongoing, I've been doing it for a few years until the pandemic hit, but we're carrying on filming now. Is a documentary that I'm filming myself about the illicit rhino horn trade. So that's going in. Doing the next chapter of that will be going in, and I was born in South Africa, which means that I've got a passport there, so I can do armed anti-poaching ranger training. Because I'm South African. And so they've said that they'll take me in for 6 weeks of that, and that means that then I can get on the front lines with those anti-poaching rangers, literally in the shots fired zone, understanding what they're going through and filming that, because that's kind of a no access normally zone. But they were kind of like, well, if you do go through that, you're kind of legitimately there, not, just some kind of person we have to look after. And yeah, that's following, going through all the criminal syndicates and getting some interviews in there, which is a little bit dodgy. I'm kind of iffy about some of that because you do paint a target on your back then. There have been issues with people having a lot of trouble and certain people disappearing as journalists, and it's not a play world. And I'm realizing the deeper I get into that, the more you really, you can't muck around. It's not just like a fluffy world of going in and interviewing and doing silly little documentaries. So that's interesting. Having to have the security teams around you for that. The amount of money that you have to set stuff up like this is huge. It's extraordinary. And then following that journey all the way to the Far East, new trade routes that are happening out there. And there's a few exciting bits to it, looking for northern white rhino that supposedly are still out there in the wild. And people have only just seen signs of that recently. So
Did you interview a guy that farms rhino horn?
Yes. John Hume.
Tell us about him.
Super controversial.
Yeah, because I've got an opinion on him and trophy hunting as someone that loves animals, and I personally wouldn't trophy hunt, but I can see their argument. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah, it's a really tough thing. I mean, trophy hunting versus farming, two different things. The trophy hunting side of things, it's a really hard one because you can see that if everything did go correctly without corruption, then money and funds would get to the right places. As in, there's a limited amount of trophy hunting that would happen. The funds would go to the community. The meat would go to the community. And the conservation in that region, and that's kind of like all supporting itself, and that on paper makes sense. Having grown up in South Africa and also done a lot of investigations out there, it's just even with a lot of the the conservation organizations, it's big business.
Yeah, and
so it's just, if it did work without the issues happening around it of corruption, perhaps there's a valid point in that. And there's people who have had great arguments for that and really brought me around. I still, I can't get my head around just trophy hunting for the sake of having something on the wall.
Yeah.
That I don't understand. If you need to cull and the meat goes to community and I totally, that needs to happen, because we have squeezed nature and wildlife to such a point that we
and
now have to manage it
as well,
and indigenous communities, exactly, and we now have to manage that because we've caused so much issue because of our encroachment on that. No problem with that, having to manage that, and I think there's we have to get to the root cause of that, which is human encroachment. But when it comes to the farming side of things, this is a really interesting thing that we're still ongoing filming. He's facing bankruptcy now, so that's a bit of an issue his side. But he essentially, at the point that we were filming out there, had over 2,000 rhino that he was farming. He was waiting for international trade in rhino horn to open up, and he was fighting for international trade in rhino horn to become legal. Nationally, I believe it was illegal at the time, but not internationally. And he was banking on the fact that if you could farm rhino and you could harvest the horn from the rhino and sell them into that market of demand in the Far East, you could save a species. Because it costs so much money on security to have rhino on a private game reserve, or even the government, the amount of money that they have. A rhino is worth more dead than it is alive. and no one really wants rhino because of the amount of millions of US dollars have to go into the security of those animals if you have them on your reserve. So his idea is to farm them. But yeah, there's issues with that. In the Far East, they're saying, well, this is all great, but we don't want farmed rhino horn. We want wild. That's where the value is. And it's so complicated.
When we discuss farmed rhino, so what it is they live on a reserve. They're tranquilized, every year?
Yeah.
And then the horn is cut.
Couple of years, I think, yeah.
Couple of years. The horn is cut off, and then you would sell the horn. The rhino gets to live on. It's not.
Yeah, it's made of keratin. It grows back just like your nails grow back.
Yeah.
Made of the same stuff.
It's absolutely bonkers, though, isn't it? That the Far East, like, we want wild horn. I'm like, it's fingernail. Like, that's all it is.
It's just keratin, guys.
Yeah.
Like, it's just. But that's the thing is, you're up against centuries of medicinal beliefs. And it involves, now it's not just the medicinal value. It's used quietly behind the scenes in big business trade deals. It's seen as a token of if you can give somebody in a business deal some rhino horn. It's seen as a good gesture that you've got the youngsters now who are going to wealthy youngsters going to parties and sniffing it like cocaine. There's so many different uses. It's just evolving and how do you ever get away from this demand? So in a way, a lot of the guys are saying, well, you got to look at it holistically and say, we've got to go out and in country where the issue is and where the demand is have educational stuff happening and, having really high profile sportsmen and women and, musicians and stuff, trying to change the opinions of that it shouldn't be used out there. But it's just so complicated. And also, in the countries where the poaching happens, there's so much corruption. You get diplomats having them in suitcases going through. It's just so hard.
It's so hard as well, because you can't blame, the farmer that hasn't got a farm anymore because of whatever reason, drought. He's got to support his family. Then why wouldn't he go and, kill a rhino to sell the horn where he could make more money than he would in a year?
Yeah, look, these actual poachers that go onto the reserves that are hired by the criminal syndicates, they're just cannon fodder.
Yeah.
They're just guys that go out there. If they get killed, they don't really care. There's plenty more to go. These communities have hundreds of thousands of people, and these communities flank those nature reserves like the Kruger National Park, and they're in such dire poverty that it is literally, how can you find any way to make money to feed your children? And when you face that, this is what the documentary in part is about, is the human story behind each stage of this chain, because there's some good stuff and there's some bad stuff, and when you look at these poachers, some of them are horrific characters and some of them are just desperate. They're just desperate to survive.
Yeah,
that's it.
Can't even imagine being in their position. Your Pacific row that you started, tell me the story behind that and how come it, because chatting to you now, you're very successful. Anything you set your sights on, you seem to achieve. So what happened there, and how come it didn't come about?
Yeah, so it's still on the back burner. I just got to wait for my daughter to be old enough that I can get away for a year, possibly a year and a half. It's a dream that hasn't died. So the idea would be to be the first woman to go from North America, West Coast, to the East Coast of Australia, across the entire Pacific. It's a mammoth undertaking.
For people listening, right, so my row was 4,630 nautical miles. That would probably be about, 8,000 nautical?
Yeah. And, the thing is, with the rowing, this full well, is that you can put as a crow flies, and then, the actual route is just like spaghetti, and you have no idea. It could take, if something's supposed to take you a year, it could take you 10 months. If you're in luck, with the weather conditions.
There's also a current that you'd have to cross that's 500 miles wide.
Yes.
Like, it's so gnarly.
Yeah, and it just wants to push you back and just eat you up. And, it's nasty.
But you know what's interesting? And I think you personify it. The hardest thing about these expeditions is getting to the start line.
Oh, totally.
Because I have no doubt that you could do it physically, but people don't understand how hard the 18 months before I started my row was.
Yeah. Completely.
Like, raising money is so difficult.
It is massively.
That is the hardest part.
Everybody now is trying to do it as well.
Yeah.
But with social media now, everybody's able to try and do these crazy things and raise money, and it's just so saturated. And companies are getting applications by the 100 every single day for stuff like that. And this is the big issue. And it is on the back burner still. It's just, stuff has happened in my career. I was going to it kind of evolved for me to row around the UK. And that evolved again. And then the pandemic hit. Yeah. So now I've got to like catch up. And then I had a baby. So now we just got to get a little few years down the line. So please no other female do this. Actually, I still want to do it. But yeah, you're totally right. Like, I think people have no idea just getting to the start line. But it's like that, to be fair, it's like that with anything in life. We have all these amazing, great, huge ideas. And it's like, 99% of people just don't ever start. That's the hard bit, just start. And so I end up doing really weird tactics, like El Humphrey's great guy, great adventurer. He kind of taught everyone this is, if that is so hard to get to start line, that just do something that you can't back out of. So for me, booking the flights to location. I might not have any of the funding. I might not have any of the plans out there, but I'm going to book those damn flights to that start location. And I better hell get my butt together and do something about making that plan happen, because now I've spent £1,000. Like, I can't back out of this thing as booked, and tell as many people as you can. So you hold yourself to account. But it's so hard. It is so hard. Mental game. It really is a mental and emotional game just to do.
Putting up with that rejection to keep going. Because I remember going to meetings, pitching my idea, and I'd be like, and I knew full well they're probably going to give me nothing, or you'd pitch to someone and they'd be like, we can't do £3,000 to buy your food, but what about 500? And you'd be like, but to be fair, actually, no, you'd be buzzing because at least you got something.
I know, it's true, but yeah, there's a big issue at the moment. It's like you go to companies and you need kind of like a few grand or a few tens of thousands, or in some cases a few hundreds of thousands, and you're like, and they'll come back to you and say, well, no, we can't do that, but here's a pair of shoes. And you're like, oh, shit's sake.
Can't give you 10 grand, but here's a new iPhone case.
No, but it is, like I've recently been going back through some of my emails and clearing stuff out, and I sent literally hundreds of emails out to companies at the time I was fundraising for my Pacific Row. I had a company that was going to be the headline sponsor for that, and they were going to put down, I think it was £250,000, and everything was kind of go, and at the very last minute, they kind of emailed to say, we are so sorry, some internal stuff has gone down. Financially, we have a lot of change going on, and we're going to have to pull out. And the devastation of that, when you have such excitement, you have such get up and go, and you're literally on top of the world, to have that ripped from underneath you, to have square one, start from scratch, nothing, and that hard climb. It's almost impossible to get a sponsor like that for 250 grand. Like, are you kidding me? You can get maybe 2,500, but 250,000, that doesn't just come by and happen.
My biggest sponsor was 15 grand.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. Dagger Dive Services. Thank you. Yeah,
thank
you. I'm very appreciative. So I can't imagine 250 grand being pulled. Oh,
it's the mental game. You're right. It's a mental game of getting to the start. And I don't revel in the fact that I'm going to have to do that at some point when I want to do that.
Well, I'm looking for a partner to row the Indian Ocean. No one's gone mainland Australia to mainland Africa.
Oh, that's
so if you're interested, Ness Knight, let me know, because I'm looking for a partner.
When are you doing it?
Realistically, probably summer 2025.
How long is it going to take?
So it's the same distance, I reckon, about 80 days.
Okay, that's not too bad.
Doable.
Yeah. Completely.
What's your daughter's name?
Ava,
she'll be in school. She won't even know you got.
Right. Cheers, girl.
Ness, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate
pleasure.
it. It's absolutely awesome chatting to you. But I've got one final question.
Okay.
If you could give some advice to a young Ness Knight, what would it be?
Doggedness. Just utter doggedness. I would say to her that, we see it. I say to anyone, to be fair, that you look around you and you can see absolute numpties who have succeeded in stuff, and you're like, how the hell did they get there? It's doggedness, consistency, never giving up, and it doesn't matter whether you're talented or not, just doggedness, and you will get what you want. Absolutely. Thick skin.
Persistence beats resistance.
Super, exactly.
Love it. Guys, that is the end of the episode today. If you've enjoyed it, please could you follow, like, and subscribe, as it really helps grow the podcast. Guys, thank you for listening. Ness, that was awesome.
Thank you,
mate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.